I was originally going to make a video on Sonics 2 and 3. In fact, I even wrote a big script for it. But really, one thing that got in the way so much with making these reviews is that Sonics 2 and 3 aren't really interesting to talk about. They completely redesigned the way they made levels for 2 to prioritize Sonic's speed, and Sonic 3 was able to reintroduce platforming back into the mix in a way that felt natural for Sonic's gameplay. The levels are great, Spin Dash is fucking cool, and the music kicks ass. They're great games. I recommend checking them out and playing them.
You don't know how to play for shit.
And why have I beaten all the other ones, huh?
Cause it's fucking Sonic. I passed that shit when I was 12.
But making a video just felt redundant. Also, if you want to know what I thought of Mania, it was fucking great. Best game in the series. It's on par with and even better in some areas than Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I have no idea why Sonic Team didn't just do this shit earlier. So I wanted to talk about a more interesting game, Sonic Adventure. Sonic Adventure is the kind of game I can only describe as Dreamcast. Dreamcast is the feeling you get when playing a quality video game on your Sega Dreamcast, the best video game console ever made. Sonic Adventure isn't the best game on the Dreamcast. That's Marvel 2. And Bangai-O, and Third Strike, and Hydro Thunder, and Gunbird 2, and Jet Grind Radio. But Adventure represents the console really well. In terms of aesthetics, yes, but it was also the most successful game in the library. Adventure can honestly be represented by the Dreamcast. They're both a bit unpolished. Like the Dreamcast is all noisy, its laser sounds like it's going to have a fucking stroke when reading shit off the disc, and when you boot up the console, the VMU sounds like it's going to blow up and screams at you. But when you actually start playing the good-ass games on it, you stop caring about those issues, because its library is just so fucking good. Everything in Sonic Adventure is also a bit clunky. It's kind of awkward, the camera gets stuck on shit, Sonic talks weird, Knuckles is black, but I can't help but love it because the game is just so much fun. People get really fucking emotional over Adventure for some reason. Like it's a really controversial game in some circles. Now here's a quick guide as to if you like Sonic Adventure or not, so you don't have to waste your time with this if you're actually just looking for a review. Did you play it as a kid? Then you'll probably like it. And if not, you probably won't. It's crazy to think about, but this fucking game is almost 20 years old now. And when you play a game a lot as like a 7-year-old kid, that shit sticks in your soul. So you know what? I can't necessarily separate my nostalgia for this game, but I'm gonna do my best and try to talk about the game without falling back on this emotional shit just because I played it as a kid. We're gonna talk about the mechanics, how shit got translated over from 2D, we'll follow some of the stories and see how Sonic Team did writing a plot, and we'll have fun doing it. And one more thing. This isn't some definitive review of Sonic Adventure or anything stupid like that. There's this new meme on YouTube, which is to watch a video of some game that's like 2 to 3 hours with some snarky contrarian point of view, usually with some quippy little video title, and they just seem so up their own ass, like their opinion is some beacon of brilliance. This video is just long because I have a lot to say about Sonic Adventure. My thoughts on something aren't any more relevant or important than any other guy in a comments section or image board post.
Oh, yeah!
Oh, fuck. The first thing that happens when you start the game as Sonic is surprisingly that he talks.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
Okay, let's just get this shit out of the way, alright? We'll do all the talking about the voice acting here, so we don't need to be talking about it later. In this game, he's voiced by Ryan Drummond, who does an alright job. The acting isn't too great, but then again, it's not really great for any of the other characters either. It's a mix of almost all of them being pulled from the theater, and this is probably one of their first jobs out of that environment, which makes sense. You have to go from actually interacting with other actors to saying lines in a dark room with a director giving you little bits of feedback. And the voice director was probably a bit like, oh, fuck it. You know, I'm just gonna put in the least amount of effort possible to get through the day. I'm just doing my job. Daily grind, am I right, gang? Because of this, all the characters talk like ransom notes. Every sentence sounds like it's completely devoid of any context.
That's Eggman! I wonder what happened to Sonic.
Even in the sequel, it still has this problem.
Since we've stopped the Chaos Emeralds, why is the space colony still on a crash course to Earth?
Alright, Knuckles, you're gonna be playing Knuckles. Anyways, we have these lines here, just say it, alright? Since we stopped the Chaos Emeralds falling, but the voices are great at matching the characters' personalities at least, and Drummond does have a lot of energy in his performance.
Come on, you big drip! Where you going?
He definitely works as Sonic. I could totally believe that's what he sounds like. But God, I can't think of any of these old voices anymore without thinking about the absolute shit show that came out of them being replaced in the later games. If you're too young to remember, which is actually a possibility now, let me give you a history lesson on some dumb shit on the internet. At some point in the series, this old cast was replaced with some new voices from 4Kids. And, to say people weren't big fans of these guys is an understatement. Let's Spax3 serenade you with his thoughts on Sonic's new voice at the time, Jason Griffith.
Dang, that just... I hate his guts. He sucks so much. I hate it. I mean, personally, if he got hit by a car and died, I'd cheer.
Now, I stopped playing Sonic games after Heroes. I didn't play Shadow, and I didn't have a next-gen console for the longest time. Well, besides a Wii.
Come on now. Wii? Come on, that little controller, baby, that looks like a dildo.
So I never got to play Sonic 06, but from what I can tell, the quality of the games after Heroes seemed to be in decline. The new voice cast came in right as they started Shadow, which seemed to not be very well liked. And right after was Sonic 06, which also wasn't great. And after that was Secret Rings, which I did pick that one up, but it was a bit weird. For some reason, all of Sonic's friends were Arab in this game, and it was on rails, which I didn't find very fun. I had to flick the controller a lot. So I think it was just that there was a string of mediocre games which fans were frustrated with, and these new voices were just going over the line. But people started acting like the games would be better if the old voice cast came back. It's like a really stupid version of Pavlov's dog, where these new voices are only in these terrible games. So they start to associate the new voices with the terrible games, and then start to believe that the games are terrible because of the new voices. This only got worse when Sonic got announced for Brawl. Because Griffith was voicing him, people made campaigns to call Nintendo of America and ask them to put Drummond in, just so he could go, whoa, take that. You want a piece of me? There were so many videos made in Windows Movie Maker telling people to call and write to Nintendo as if they were gonna fucking do anything. People cared about this shit a lot. This was serious, okay? People lost friends over this shit. Because of all the drama, people started making these videos that had black screens that were like, all right, guys, I'm leaving the Sonic fan base. And then they, just be making videos again 2 weeks later. One thing that's nice is that even if you hate the prospect of Sonic talking, it never really becomes a problem in-game at all, as his jump sound effect is based off the Genesis one, and he never hits you with any quips or anything during gameplay, unless you're playing as Tails. In fact, I think the only voice clip in the game is when you hit a power-up and he goes, yes! In these new games, Sonic never lets you forget he can talk, and they keep escalating it. I saw some footage for Sonic Forces, the new game, and Jesus, they're having full conversations during the levels.
I guess anyone who crosses Eggman gets a one-way trip to space. I don't do well in tight spaces. Had me locked up on the death egg. The one I came in on must be around here somewhere.
At least in Adventure, I can just play through and enjoy the stages without having to listen to Sonic's podcast. Anyways, the second thing that happens when you start the game as Sonic is surprisingly a boss. It's not hard or anything, like no one's gonna have trouble beating this guy, but there's a reason games don't normally do this. Usually when you start the first real level in a game, you're given a safe area in the beginning with no enemies or hazards around, so you can get used to the space and learn the movement and the controls, and get comfortable with them before you start the game. What's odd is that the first stage in Sonic Adventure 1 has this area. It even has some goodies in the back for you to discover if you take the time to play with the camera too. But when you're thrusted into a boss, you don't really have time to really comfortably learn the controls. So why do you fight a boss at the beginning of the game? Well, narrative purposes. Fighting Chaos right away allows us to get introduced right to our main threat, and it also lets us know Robotnik is back, and plotting something with this weird water monster gives you a bit of mystery as to how things will unfold. It's a hit in the gameplay for the purpose of the story, but they did a decent compromise as you get 2 rings for free so you don't die if he gets a stray hit on you, and plus this fight really only uses the jump button and that's it. But even with that, some people still make a big fuss about it. Maybe it's just a big no-go in those game design books written by weirdos. Hey, by the way, on a completely 100% unrelated note, this video is sponsored by Full Sail University. Spend $100,000 fucking dollars on our shitty game design degree. Anyway, Sonic hangs out with some bitches after beating Chaos and ends up having to go find Tails in the Emerald Coast, which introduces us to some very important aspects as to what makes Sonic Adventure so great. The level design and the stellar soundtrack. The stage is proof that Sonic's gameplay can absolutely be translated into a 3D space. If anything, 3D actually works better in one aspect, which is that you can actually see and react to the enemies and hazards in front of you. And Emerald Coast is just a fantastic stage that's throwing new shit at you all the time. You get these cool rubber band things that fling you at an angle, then you get to run away from this orca, you do some vertical platforming on this mountain, and then holy shit, the music changes to this amazing track remixed from 3D Blast, and Sonic is running at a 90-degree angle. While they have some branching paths on the level, they couldn't really get as crazy as they could in Sonic 3, so they made up for it by having stages be really dynamic, lots of little things to break up any feelings of tediousness. I feel as if Sonic Team has more ambition with these games than they actually put in. All these dynamic aspects of the stage are really cool, but they don't always work out so great. I imagine they wanted you going on the rubber bands until the end, but in practice you just kind of bounce off one or two of them and then go, I don't want to do this shit, what the fuck? Running up the hill is a real novel once you get it going, but the controls are a bit odd to get it working. You have to keep Sonic moving directly forward and can only make tiny movements in either direction. When I was a kid, my instinct was always to press left to keep Sonic on the wall, and I'd be bummed out because he'd just fall off. But I don't know, maybe I'm just stupid. But I think they knew the shit was a little bit janky because even though it probably took a fair amount of programming to get working, you only use it 2 other times on Speed Highway and Red Mountain, and you're not really punished hard for failing either of them. They introduce all sorts of one-off mechanics and stages, like these ice stalagmites or stalactites or whatever in Ice Cap, or the puzzles in Lost World. Some of them are more engaging than others. I think the pinball sections are really cool, both as a fun reference to the spin-off Sega Genesis game, and the fact that they put 2 different pinball stages in here. The Knights one is my favorite due to the cards, although it's probably just because I like Knights. I like that game a lot. Getting to the end of this stage is actually a lot of fun to figure out. The emerald is right in your sights, but it's just out of reach with a collision box preventing you from cheesing your way up, and you have to get enough rings to build a pile of them so you can jump to it. But overall, the more favorable stages keep these gimmicks to a minimum, like Red Mountain and Speed Highway. Sonic 3 and Knuckles had some stage gimmicks, but they were almost all things that would accelerate Sonic further, like these guys in Hydrocity, the platforms in Marble Garden, and even the ghosts in Sand Ocean exist to rush the player along even faster. It's one of the reasons the barrel is so stupid. Not only is it ass backwards to get working, but it's not satisfying to use because it doesn't even give you any extra speed aside from a little bit of extra verticality. But in Adventure there's a lot of things like the barrel. The ice stalagmites and Ice Cap just put you to a halt, although it's made up for by the cool snowboarding section. Same thing with the switch puzzle in Lost World, you're just kind of waiting around. Probably added all these things because they were a bit scared that Sonic's general mechanics couldn't carry the gameplay on its own, which is a bit dumb because it's a lot of fun to play as Sonic. Sure, his movement options aren't very deep, but Sonic doesn't need to be some super complex branching state machine, especially when interacting with the stages as is already really engaging and fun. And even though Sonic's mechanics are very simple, stuff like the spin dash is just so much fun to fuck around with, especially when you do it on an angled surface and he goes 80 miles into the air. I've neglected the story until now, which you might not think is very important, but guess what? You can't skip the cutscenes in Sonic Adventure.
Oh, jeez.
You have to watch it from all the characters' perspectives. The story in Sonic Adventure is integral to the core game. You spend like half your time in the game watching cinematics, so we're going to take some time out occasionally and look at this shit. It really is just confusing though. I mean, who the hell thought this was a good idea? Oh, this guy. Takashi Iizuka. Sorry about that. You see, this guy was the lead game designer on Sonic 3, and he wanted Sonic Adventure to be kind of a Sonic RPG. And everyone was like,
Oh, jeez.
I mean, okay, I guess what could go wrong, right? I mean, it's a bit weird, but maybe it could work, and it actually kind of does. I can't say I'm as engaged with it now that I'm older, but as a kid, I thought these cutscenes were really fun, and it kind of feels like an evolution in a way. 3 and Knuckles had a bit of a storyline to it with some lore and all that, but those are just some nice little additions to a fun platformer that aren't really that important. But in Sonic Adventure, now it's really important. Now it actually needs to be engaging. So they drug in this guy to write the story, Akinori Nishiyama. He mainly worked on the Phantasy Star games and has been a mainstay at the company since the Master System. So when they needed a writer, they probably just, looked around the offices, like snooping around the cubicles and were like, I guess you'll do. And it ended up working out pretty well, and Nishiyama would go on to actually direct to the Sonic Advance series and Sonic Rush, which I fucking love, by the way. This game is fire. He also went on to produce a K-On! Game, which is kind of sad in a way. I mean, if he was earlier to the game, he could have maybe worked on a project for the obviously superior slice of life manga and anime series. The story's pretty simple, so I mean, what can you really fuck up? After Sonic finds Tails, they have to get the Chaos Emeralds before Robotnik does, so he doesn't feed them to the Chaos Monster, which he'll use to become the ultimate dictator of the world and make his amusement park. It's a fun story that fits with the antics of a blue rat that runs fast. Compare this to Sonic Adventure 2's story. Sonic gets arrested, the moon gets blown up, some CIA spooks chase Sonic and his friends, ancient technology in Egypt, abandoned space colony, a little girl gets murdered, Sonic dies, comes back to life 3 days later, Black Sonic dies, man gets shot by a firing squad, and a lizard gets fucked by a space laser. It's a bit much. While it does get a little annoying having to watch the cutscenes multiple times with different characters, they do an interesting thing to try and solve the problem. They wrote different scripts of dialogue for each character, and they actually wrote it to represent a scene from the perspective of the character you're playing as. Tails is the most obvious example with Robotnik. In Sonic's story, he sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon villain who's bumbling and cocky.
If it isn't Sonic!
But in Tails' story, they actually got his voice actor to sound threatening, implying that Robotnik probably creates some sense of fear in Tails.
Well, well, well. If it isn't Sonic and Tails.
You know, most of the bosses are actually programmed great. Like, they're not always fun, but they work. Except this one, where you just mash A in a rhythm until he dies. It's the first real boss in the game that wasn't Chaos Zero either, which is kind of unfortunate. You're probably also wondering what the fuck Sonic was doing there. But actually, you're probably not, because, you know, this game's like 20 years old now, so you already know what the homing attack is, so alright. In Sonic 3, Sonic got this nifty move called the Instant Shield, which would come out when the player pressed a button while airborne. It would make Sonic's hitbox slightly bigger, and I believe it added some invincibility frames, but I can't be sure. Sonic Adventure doesn't really have a use for an Instant Shield though, and just trying to jump on an enemy, especially moving ones, is very frustrating. Any remotely smart player would end up adapting to this by just completely ignoring enemies in the stage. So the problem to solve is to make it fun to fight enemies in a way that doesn't hurt Sonic's momentum, and is practical and easy in a 3D space. The homing attack does a decent job at accomplishing all these goals. For one, it can be used as a quick way to gain momentum if Sonic were to slow down, and the way the attack works allows for it to have its very own unique platforming mechanics, something Windy Valley especially takes advantage of. It's not any deeper than pressing A at the correct time, but it's still decently satisfying to pull off and does a good job of diversifying the level design through Sonic's core gameplay. But the issue that keeps the homing attack from being great is this. When you hit the enemy with it, Sonic loses all of his momentum, which ends up making the flow of the game not as good as it could be, and also denies the mechanics some depth. Now let's break this down for a second so I can explain a bit better. Now I'm not a CAD cuck, so I can't give this to you in 3D, but it'll get the point across nonetheless. We have on the left here a profile view of Sonic's homing attack, and the one on the right is a top-down view. So what are you thinking will happen here? Right, Sonic bounces off of it like this. And the angle on the x-axis Sonic could bounce off of could be based on the direction the player's inputting at the time of contact, carrying the momentum, keeping the flow of gameplay strong, right? Well, wrong. What actually happens is Sonic just bounces straight up, completely dissolving all the momentum from the attack and the speed you've built up. The issue with it is that it heavily limits what you can do to design things around the homing attack, because at the end of the attack, Sonic will always end up in the exact same position, no matter what. Every segment that focuses on it is just a segment of a couple enemies in a line. If Sonic could keep the momentum, they could have designed these segments to be much more interesting, as Sonic would now be able to drift in the air based on the direction the player was holding when the homing attack hit. It's just very frustrating because the homing attack works well with fixing the issue of attacking enemies in a 3D space as Sonic, but simply adding this element could have turned it from a nice solution into a genuinely fun option in Sonic's moveset. Now I could see the reasoning for resetting Sonic's momentum after a homing attack in the issue where homing attacking an enemy by the ledge sends Sonic flying off the stage after the attack, which is a completely valid reason. Although after the homing attack, you have the ability to use it again, so the player would still have an opportunity to save themselves in this situation. But if that's really the concern, perhaps this could have been met halfway. Maybe if Sonic hits an enemy and nothing on the stick is pressed, the game gets rid of the momentum and acts as it does now. But if the player is inputting the direction, he keeps it. Or he could keep it based on whether or not the homing attack button is held down at the point of impact. I don't fucking know. I don't even know why I'm spending this much time getting hung up on this.
It must get pretty lonely here.
Now seems like a good time to talk about the overworlds, or adventure fields as the game calls them, but I'm going to be calling them overworlds. After action stages, you can now move around an overworld and find your way to the next stage or cutscene. You also get this magic ball which gives you hints on where to go next if you get stuck.
Did you walk around the whole city?
The game includes 3 of them: Station Square, which is my personal favorite, the Mystic Ruins, and the Egg Carrier. It might be convenient to just label these worlds as filler, but I wouldn't. As to me, the definition of filler is to pad out the game length in a way that doesn't take much time and resources from the developer, and it's clear that there was some real effort and love put into these. They have completely original assets, and even have NPCs, which is very cute. In fact, I went on this website called Secrets of Sonic Team, which shows that originally they were going to have more NPCs hanging around, and it looks awesome. I guess they might have gotten cut due to time restraints, or maybe they took up too many resources, but damn does it look great. It's a nice surprise because I thought when I clicked on a website called Secrets of Sonic Team that it would just be all the employees jerking each other off. In fact, these NPCs actually have a lot of fun things about them that I don't see brought up often. It's a bit weird that humans are now in a Sonic game, but one thing that helps to keep the tone of the game a bit in check is the fact that Sonic never really interacts with the humans. Like, you can press A in front of them and they'll talk to you, but Sonic never responds, so even he knows it's a bit awkward and weird. Like this guy who starts talking about his girl troubles. I can't even imagine how fucking ridiculous it would be if Sonic actually started responding back to this guy with advice. You know, I really liked this girl and I thought I was gonna be with her forever, you know? It just came out of nowhere and I wasn't even able to prepare myself for it. I feel so lost and I'm not sure what I need to do to continue on with my life after this. Hey, you know, this is a lot like Also, unlike in Sonic 2006, which also had humans, it works more here because the humans are still stylized. They have a bit of an anime look to them, with bigger heads, big eyes, and cartoonish features, so it doesn't cause as much of a shock. Now, this might have just been to save a couple polygons for more important things like the environments and Sonic himself, but it ends up looking a lot better in time. There's a couple characters that even go through little arcs, like this guy who ends up getting a side bitch and dealing with the consequences, or the train workers who go on strike so the game can keep you from going to Mr. Gruen's, who, by the way, got all their accommodations in less than 24 hours, which is pretty damn impressive. Oh yeah, and there's also the girl who wants to give a hand job to the guy at the burger shop. Also, I can't find anywhere to talk about chows real quick, so this is probably the best place. This game introduces these little Tamagotchi things called Chao, which were really just a way to show off the VMU and what it could do, but they're still neat to mess around with. I don't fuck with them that much in this game as it's pretty underdeveloped, especially when compared to how expanded upon it would become in Adventure 2, but they're still kind of cool to play with, and there's even a mini game where you can race them. It's pretty cool that you can come back to the overworld after finishing a stage and you can do things like check in on your chow and see how these story developments are being handled by the NPCs. It wasn't necessary at all, but it makes the world feel lived in and comfy. Another great thing about the overworld is that they act as a nice stage to set all the cutscenes, meaning all they had to do was animate characters moving around it and play voice clips, which probably helped a lot with getting the game shipped on time. The overworlds are pretty funny to me due to how comically huge they are to accommodate Sonic's speed, but there's an issue, which is that it doesn't accommodate the other characters as well. Some are really slow, like Big and Amy, and half of their stories are just moving from one place in the overworld to another. You could say just to make them faster, but they dug themselves into a bit of a hole because they need the slow movement for their gameplay to work. So this is just an unfortunate side effect of having a shared overworld for all the characters and having the speeds between them vary heavily. One last thing about him, and most people won't care about this stuff, but it's a nice addition that the time of the day in the overworlds will change occasionally. Like there'll be a cool sunset with this pink skyline, and I love that shit. The only issue is there's no early morning segment where I get to walk around as Sonic before the sun rises and be all introspective and think about the shit that actually matters in life. Like when it truly means to go fast, or how, even though I have the speed to break through the sound barrier, I'll never be able to break through these feelings of self-judgment and helplessness. Or how I'm stuck with all these friends who I can't connect with on any meaningful dimensions in my life. Upgrades are introduced after Windy Valley in the sewer where you find the Lightspeed shoes.
Now you've got Lightspeed shoes.
This allows Sonic to dash through a series of rings that are close to each other after charging up for a bit. Sonic gets a couple more upgrades after this, but they all just kind of add to the Lightspeed dash. And this add-on that attacks enemies is more of a hindrance than anything, because you want to dash through some rings, but because of this stray enemy in Sonic's radius, he just does the attack instead. It's odd to me that you're forced to get this since it's never used in any level designs, not even the one you play right after getting it. Upgrades in general feel a bit weak in this game. Like the spin attack Amy gets, there's no reason to ever use it as it brings her to a complete stop and her gameplay involves running away from something. so using it will just get you into more trouble. In fact, a lot of these are pretty useless. Big gets some fishing lines that are only really used if you want to get all the emblems. And Knuckles gets pimped out with so much shit, I don't think anyone knows what it does. There's also a couple that I imagine were just normal parts of the character's movement before they decided to separate it and give it to them as an upgrade. Gamma's hover disc thing gives that vibe to me, since his hovering ability is pretty integral to his stages in the first place. I think it was a mistake to make these upgrades additions to the character's movesets, especially when you're not doing anything too fun with them, like encouraging the player to revisit old levels with the new moves they've got that allow them to go down new paths or shortcuts. Maybe this could have some goodies, I don't know. Have some more of those special Chao eggs that were already put in the overworld, it'd be cool. You wouldn't even need to figure out how to access the Chao Garden from an action stage or anything crazy. Just code it as a flag that I found the egg, and then spawn it next to the stage entrance in the overworld after I finish the stage. And even if players didn't like the Chao Garden, it'd make for a fun collectible to get. Maybe it'd even introduce some people to the Chao's mechanics a bit better, since there's not much incentive to play around with them as they are now, and that's sad, because Chaos are awesome. Adventure 2 would eventually take advantage of this idea a bit more, giving you extra upgrades like the melody or rare animals for the Chao if you were to revisit old stages with your new equipment. Maybe they could have instead went with giving you most of the moveset from the start. Maybe Sonic could get the Lightspeed Dash just so it gives you a little bit of a tutorial on how to use it, but for the most part, make these upgrades quality of life things for the mechanics, like allowing a character to accelerate to top speed faster. Wait a second, they did that. Yeah, they did that with Tails.
Look, it's your jet anklet.
He only has 2 upgrades he can get, and both of them are pretty well hidden. These 2 upgrades are some things for his shoes that make him fly a bit faster, aiding him in his races, and this little ribbon that makes it so you can mash his spin attack by holding the B button, as opposed to 1 spin per press. If they made more upgrades like this, I'd love the hell out of the feature and be a lot more receptive to it. Sonic has one of these kind of upgrades too, and getting it is actually pretty fun. It makes the Lightspeed Dash quicker to pull off, but the main drawback is that Sonic ends up wearing this little bracelet the rest of the game, and it's kind of silly. Although I do like the cyan, it's very Dreamcast. I like this button on the entrance of the casino that you have to press with your new Lightspeed ability to enter it. It's a cute way to mix upgrades into the world. I wish there were a couple more of these. I can't be too upset about it though, because even though the upgrades are underutilized the way they are, it's at least painless to use them to enter the level, which is something I can't say about getting into the next stage. After finishing Casinopolis and watching a cutscene, this key falls down from the sky, which you need to take to the entrance of the next stage. This is probably the worst kind of puzzle in any game ever. You're literally just carrying an object from one location to another, and it's not even like the destination is hidden. The game literally blows out any question as to where you need to take this thing when you enter the Mystic Ruins. The only thing that makes up for it is that at least my speed isn't decreased. I have no idea why or how these stupid puzzles make their way into games. Even the new God of War has a puzzle like this. Maybe there's somebody out there who gets some real satisfaction out of these, and God, I'd love to meet them. I bet they lose it when they get to ride the subway. The stage you get to play after is cool though. Ice Cap is great. It mixes things up a bit with some vertical platforming and has some nice ambient music the whole way through, but really what makes it so good is the snowboarding segment. I don't even care that it doesn't handle great. How do you not get pumped by this atmosphere? There's an avalanche chasing after you while this music is playing. It actually has some fun things in it, like some alternate paths, and these jumps that send you at a faster speed depending on what point of the slope you press the button. These 2 segments manage to make this thing really fun, even though you're never in any danger. Back to the story, Sonic and Tails have been getting some emeralds to keep Robotnik from making Chaos stronger and end up meeting Knuckles.
What's up, Knuckles?
Now in a weird decision, they carried the Knuckles fight right over from 3 and K, in that they're both equally disappointing and lame. In this one, it's even easier since you have the homing attack, so you can just press the A button a couple times and he barely puts up a fight.
Oh no. Give it your... Oh no.
It's about as hard as if I were to go outside and fight a real echidna.
Oh no. The Chaos Emeralds. Oh!
Ha! Like taking candy from a baby.
That's a Chaos Emerald. Knuckles, don't tell me Eggman tricked you again.
Me? What about you? Now I have 4 emeralds. Chaos!
Chaos 4 is without a doubt the worst boss in the game. You have to fight this guy 3 times, completely unchanged. You just hop around on these lily pads waiting for him to finish his boring attack so he can raise his head out of the water for you to hit him. A couple of bosses in the game do this, where you're just waiting for cycles to end so that they can open themselves up for an attack. The bosses that are designed in this fixed way are the 3 Chaos 4 fights, Beta Mark II and the Egg Viper. But the latter two at least take advantage of these kind of bosses, which is that the developer has more control over the pacing of the fight. These 2 bosses feel more cinematic because of this, and they're very memorable. But Chaos 4? He's just fucking boring. And encompasses all the negatives of this kind of boss, which is that you're just waiting around, and you're not even trying to find openings or exploit weaknesses. In fact, you're not even fighting a boss, you're just avoiding obstacles. This is one of the few things Sonic Adventure 2 really improved on. All the bosses in that game at least feel like you're fighting something. Some of the bosses are still programmed in cycles, but the difference is that at least their hurt box is always out, which means that if you're smart or you have a certain ability that gets unlocked later, you can find alternative ways to hit them in the middle of their cycle.
Behold my floating masterpiece, the egg carrier!
Alright, I have to talk about this because it really made me mad as a kid. Robotnik shows off his giant ship with a really nicely done pre-rendered cutscene, but afterwards it just looks terrible in comparison. Like, it looks worse than most things in the game. The issue is mainly that it's huge. You see, graphics chips and cards and computers can only render a certain number of polygons on screen before they cause a nuclear meltdown in your house. As hardware and technology continue to advance, the number of polygons you can draw without a performance hit becomes exponential. Because of this, you can add more and more polygons to objects to give the illusion of curvature, making games over the years look smoother and smoother as a result. So let's say you have a big object on the screen. If you don't have a high polygon count, it's going to look incredibly jaggedy and fuckety because it would take an insane amount of polygons to make that thing look smooth due to its size, which they can afford to do in something like Sky Chase, since the only other polygons on screen are Sonic, Tails, the plane, and a couple bullets and enemies. But here it's being rendered at the same time as the adventure field, which is goddamn gigantic, and probably pushing the system decently hard as it is. So they have to make this rendered down, stupid version of the ship. There's a similar thing in Mario 64, you ever play that game, where if Mario ever becomes a certain distance away from the camera, his normal model will be replaced with one that has less polygons on it. Because the graphics chip is having to render more objects than usual, swapping for this simpler model saves some polygons that can be used for the large amounts of geometry on the stage at the moment. Anyways, getting back to my Sonic review. Sky Chase just makes me sad, because they put effort into this. You have a points counter, they had to develop and design these enemy locations and actions and all that. But you can just press a bit to the right and down and keep it there and you'll just win. And you can use this little break to use the washroom, get a snack, and if you're real fast, you can speedrun yourself jerking off. This trick works in the second act of Sky Chase also, at least until the end where you have to press A a couple of times. But it's a really slow and boring part of the game, and there's no way to make it go faster, which is just annoying in a Sonic game, where you at least are supposed to feel like you have control over the pace of things. So it sucks a bit, the game has entered a little bit of a lull. Chaos 4 is bullshit and Sky Chase is just a chore, but they make up for it right after with the 2 best stages in the game, Twinkle Park and Speed Highway. Right away with Twinkle Park, you just jump into these carts and ride down this racetrack with this godly remix of a track from 3D Blast. The cart actually controls pretty well. You just have to let your hand off the accelerator to make sharper turns, and that's really it. It's a really detailed section, and it just keeps going. I like that you get dropped down this hole at the end of the cart ride and fall into this roller coaster, getting to see the rest of the stage from the top down. It's a great and creative spectacle for sure. There's this cool bowling minigame, and I like the stage's level design being more focused on scaling vertically up this castle like an ice cap. One thing that's weird though is that the arc Sonic gets shot at when the racing segment is over doesn't really work. Sonic just kind of lands next to the hole, and it's pretty awkward, so I always make sure to hold forward a bit so it doesn't happen and he properly falls in. Also, Amy just got kidnapped, but fuck her, because we still gotta play through Speed Highway. And Sonic knows, man, because at this point in the story, he's trying to save Amy, but he just ignores her so he can run through Speed Highway, which I don't blame him for. This stage is way more fun than anything you get with that dumb whore. The music is fucking fantastic, and the stage is so goddamn entertaining. There's no bullshit with the stage. Everything in it is all about gaining speed, even if the camera doesn't like cooperating at times. Even the little gimmicky section where you run down the building is cool and keeps the flow to the stage. If there's anything I don't like is that afterwards, you just come out and it's just daytime now, and you have to just stumble around for a bit until you find the end. I don't know, the whole stage just has this upward momentum, but it just gets tuckered out at the end all of a sudden, like it blew its load too early. Also, the story is, whatever. Amy is hanging out with a bird, and the bird has a Chaos Emerald. Robotnik wants the Chaos Emerald, so he sends a big monkey robot to capture the bird, and by proxy, Amy. Sonic tries to stop him from kidnapping her, fails, learns to assault people, and heads into Red Mountain. Which also kicks ass, by the way. The music in the underground has a different vibe to it. I mean, it's not my favorite from Trent Reznor, but it isn't bad by any means. The stage also has a lot of slopes, which really allows for a lot of cool sequence breaking through the physics of the spin dash. The way slopes and spin dashes work together in this game has been enough to give it a decent speedrunning community. You can really do some ridiculous stuff with this, like getting up to the Knuckles areas of Casinopolis. By the way, did I mention how easy it is to go out of bounds in this game? The walls are just silly, but it's never really impacted me much. I think I've only fallen through this one area of Emerald Coast like once in the many times I've played this game as a kid. And it's weird, but I always kind of liked it. I loved looking up videos on YouTube back in like 2007 on out-of-bounds glitches you could do in this game. You could do some fun stuff with it, like playing the first half of Emerald Coast with Tails, or going to areas on the egg carrier model that aren't normally accessible. It was a lot of fun. It made me feel like I was finding weird secrets and doing shit I wasn't supposed to. Sega gets a lot of shit for always wanting Sonic games shipped as fast as possible. They don't care about actually enjoying the experience or making a quality, memorable, or polished product. They just care about calming. I feel as if there's a constant conflict where Sonic Team really seems passionate about these games, but Sega is just breathing down their necks to get it done as quick as possible. And really, why shouldn't they? They're just kids' games that happen to make a lot of money for them. In Sonic Adventure 1, you can see this conflict with things like writing this expansive story, and they wrote different scripts for the same scene depending on who you're playing as, but they only animated like 2 things for Robotnik to do. This game is super detailed, again, very dynamic, branching paths, many games that change Sonic's moveset. They aren't always great, but the effort put into them is all the same. But also, you just fall through the game world sometimes. Whoops! Like, obviously it's just nostalgia and you should make sure that your game is optimized and runs well and is relatively bug-free. But I don't know. I wonder if I would have gotten into computers and programming as much as I did if I never played these games and wasn't fascinated by all the janky-ass shit in them as a kid. And back in the day, entitled game reviewers didn't exist. So when all this weird shit happens as a kid, I was just always like, I guess that just happens. Sky Chase Act 2, Electric Boogaloo, same strat works. They took the time to show the tornado transform with this nifty little animation though, and it seamlessly goes right back into the action, which is great. This leads to the introduction to the final adventure field, the egg carrier. There's this weird fucking thing in Sonic Adventure and I'll never understand it. Robotnik transforms the ship, so now Sonic can only get to him through the next action stage, Sky Chase. This is perfectly fine, but for whatever reason, instead of just letting me enter the one clear place right in front of me, Sonic stops for a second to say, "Hey, look! This is the Sky Deck!
This must be the way to the Sky Deck.
I am so confused as to why this is here. Like, I'm not mad, I just don't understand the reasoning. It'd be one thing if there were multiple entrances to different areas right now, but that's not the case. If anything, this might be the most linear segment in the whole game. Tails crashed the plane, so we can't leave the egg carrier. There's nothing to do besides the Sky Deck, and there's nothing in front of it. The game also explicitly points the camera in the direction to the one place I need to go, to this specific and very easy to identify door. Everything in the fucking game is basically screaming, "Hey, this is the Sky Deck, right here." But they didn't think it was enough, so they had Sonic take control away from me to go,
This must be the way to the Sky Deck.
They really spoon feed it to you. Like, why don't you just tell me where the Chaos Emeralds are while you're at it? Or maybe just let me give the controller to Yuji Naka and have him play through the rest of the game for me. Sky Deck is a pretty average stage for me, but Sonic Team would attempt, for the first time, messing with the gravity by moving the angle of the ship. It's a cool idea and takes advantage of the environment, but Jesus, does Sonic Team not know how to do this stuff right? The controls get all flip-flop, and Sonic really gets stuck on stuff when this happens. Thankfully, this only happens in the last section of the stage, so it's not like it ruins my day or anything. In terms of the game's story, this section is actually pretty cool. It's the only time in the game where all the playable characters are in the same place. Sonic, Tails, Amy, and Gamma all kind of have a scene here, and right after, Knuckles, Sonic, and Big fight Chaos, which is a great boss by the way. You have complete control over the speed in which you beat this guy, which means I don't really mind having to fight him 3 times. You hit these little ice cubes into his mouth and then just hit him. And what's cool is that at this point, Sonic and Knuckles have these moves that charge up. If you hit him with these, it actually does double the damage, which is odd because I don't believe any other bosses in the game are affected by these attacks in this way. I even tried it out on the Robotnik fight with Sonic, but no cigar there. In fact, the opposite happened. I died.
No!
There's some bullshit moves Chaos does where you have to just wait for him to finish his long animations, but you at least have a bit more control. You don't have to be waiting for him all the time. After the fight, Sonic chases after Robotnik but loses him and gets sidetracked by this temple in the Mystic Ruins. This leads us to our next action stage, the Lost World. This stage is a bit different than the others as it focuses more on puzzle solving and getting through mazes. As a kid, I never really liked this stage much. I think mainly because there's a couple moments where you're just kind of standing around, especially with the Surfin', which acts as a bus that takes you to different keys. It also doesn't help that the camera angle's gay. There's also these switches which end up being kind of tedious to jump on. I don't quite understand why they don't just have all these walls available to walk on from the start. It's not like it's an especially interesting puzzle. Like whenever the wall lights up, I'm like, aha! Gotcha! You just jump on them until the area you want to run on lights up. It's not like there's something cool done with this. Like for example, let's say we have 2 segments of wall which can't be run on no matter how many times you jump on this button. The way to solve this would be to position one section of the wall correctly and then travel to the other switch to properly set up the path for the player to use to progress. Now obviously there's the issue of how to communicate a puzzle like this to the player so that they're not lost or frustrated. And a puzzle like this isn't even something most players would do, since the spin dash makes so many puzzle sections in the game trivial, including this one as it already is. It's why I can only give observations, as to properly see if something would work, you need to be able to test it with the game's working mechanics and make sure there's no exploits the cheeky player can use to bypass all your hard work. As I've gotten older, I've grown a fondness for this level though, just for its variety. They really went nuts and threw everything at you. You have water slides, this puzzle where you have to raise the water and use the snake as a bus, running from boulders, turning on lights in this nifty first-person minigame. And even though I drag the wall puzzles, it's a pretty fun idea and something they'd bring back in the next game. In fact, that's probably why this part was even put in the first place. They just thought it'd be cool. After finishing the stage, Sonic comes to this strange ancient room where the red energy ball gives him a flashback.
What's this place? Where am I? This is really weird.
This is the old Mystic Ruins, before they were ruins, I guess. It's absolutely huge, which I don't quite understand. They only really exist to give you exposition, but they decided to spend their time making a huge map with all these guys that look like Knuckles hanging out in it. I mean, I appreciate the effort, but I think this might be the biggest area in the game to explore. It's at least second to the Mystic Ruins, and this shit is just to activate a couple cutscenes and give Tails a gay little ribbon. You go here with every character, and each time it gives you a bit more pieces of things, like the origins of the Chaos Emeralds and what caused the civilization to die out and why Chaos is so mad all the time. But I never, ever
Unified by
gave
one.
a fuck about any of this crap as a kid. I can understand them wanting to explain what this guy's deal is, but the Chaos Emeralds don't really need to be explained. They're already cool because they make me turn yellow. And I don't need to know why Knuckles has to defend the Emerald, I just know that's his shit. He's all about that responsibility for his island. He loves protecting that thing. Like, why do you need to know why Knuckles is guarding the Master Emerald? What difference does it make? Didn't change anything in your life. 9/11 still happened. There's still slave trade in Libya. Hey, by the way, you think Leonardo DiCaprio and that bitch from the Titanic would have stuck around together if he didn't die? I think they would have gotten sick of each other. Oh god, I forgot we're supposed to be chasing Robotnik. While we're fucking around, he launched a nuke and ruined the street next to the casino. Time for the last stage, and it rules. The music is very energetic in this stage, and it keeps the gimmicks to a minimum. The stage also has some more difficult and interesting platforming sections compared to the rest. It's also another stage that's structured vertically at times, although it's unique in that it's in the downward direction, which can basically be skipped by doing a well-timed homing attack, but I don't want to complain, because this is cool. It gives you the feeling of going deeper and deeper into the core. We're going to fight this dude. This guy's been being a dick for the whole game, and we're finally going to bring the heat, and on his home turf too. The stage is then followed by the end boss of Sonic's story, the Egg Viper. It's a really, really good fight. This is how you do a fixed boss fight that runs on cycles. First of all, Sonic can't just sit around and occasionally jump over things. You have to be mobile to get away from his missiles. Every time he throws one of these things out at you, by the way, he says this.
Get a load of this!
Which is what Harvey Weinstein said when he came in that plant. There's a nice progression of difficulty as well. At first he just gives you a hit for free, almost like he's cocky. But as it goes on, he puts a line in your way, which you have to homing attack over. But what rules about this boss is that this shit tells a story of desperation and frustration. Robotnik at some point destroys half the stage and starts breaking the floors you're standing on, trying to do anything to limit your movement. He starts playing less calculated, just trying to ram you with the buzzsaws, which ends up getting him hit faster. His dialogue changes too. It goes from this condescending challenge
See if you can make it through here, Sonic.
to being audibly pissed off.
He's not gonna get away with it.
This boss kicks ass. It's fun to play, it's super dynamic, great storytelling, it's perfect honestly. Probably the best moment in the game. Now, Robotnik could have just rammed both of these sections of platforms and killed Sonic right away. But if he did that, we would not have a game. And you'd be getting pissed because the game would be impossible to beat. And you'd go on GameFAQs and say, what the fuck? Why can't I beat Robotnik? This game's gay as fuck. Why did I even buy a Dreamcast? I should have just brought Hydro Thunder instead. And then somebody would respond, actually, his name is Eggman, not Robotnik. It was only named that because of the English translation from the Genesis games. Like, he doesn't even make an attempt to help you or answer your question. Also, Jesus Christ, I'm done. Jeez, that was a lot of fun. That was a whole 3 hours. That's just not going to cut it for a big 3D release in 1998. The issue is that Sonic Adventure is still using the same design framework from the 2D games, just with some big 3D overworlds to get you from one Genesis stage to the next. And because of their development time, Sonic Adventure is about as long as its Genesis counterparts. This isn't a bad thing by any means. If anything, this constant flow of new content makes playing through Sonic's story incredibly entertaining and very fun to revisit. It's just that the experience will be shorter. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the levels in a Sonic game take a lot longer to design than the average platformer either, which doesn't help much with the length. To top this off, the developers are now needing to work in 3D, which they didn't have much experience with. Even Nights into Dreams plays more like a 2D arcade game with polygonal graphics. These problems weren't exclusive to any company. Most developers were not comfortable with 3D game development yet, especially with creating big and detailed maps. If we look at Mario 64 again, they cut down a huge amount of development time by structuring the game differently than the previous one. They went with these open stages because it allows for you to spend a lot of time in the same areas, identifying and solving objectives, which in this game rewards you with a star. This pads the game out in a way where the player won't even notice that they aren't seeing much new content in the game, because your objective is on finding these stars through exploring these maps, not making your way through linear levels. And good for them. These guys were smart. Can you fucking imagine how much of a pain in the ass it must have been when 3D first started being the standard? Having to write this bullshit in C and assembly. I'd have fucking killed myself doing that crap. Sonic Team chose a different and slightly clumsier way to add more length to the game. They looked back at Sonic 3 and Knuckles and did something similar to what they did with Knuckles in that game. In Sonic 3, it's a lot of fun to replay the game as Knuckles because he has some different abilities to Sonic which allow him to reach secret areas. To make it extra engaging, the story ends up derailing from Sonic's path and ends up with a completely different final boss fight. Only this time, they could further specialize these characters by giving them a specific playstyle and changing the stages to fit this. You now play through the game 5 other times as different characters after completing Sonic's story, allowing us to see previous events from their perspective. And you know, it's really sad to see that even Sonic Team, a game development studio, couldn't resist trying to do their own Pulp Fiction in the 90s.
But you know what's on my mind right now? It ain't the
Chaos Emerald.
It's the dead nigger in my garage.
Oh no!
There's this argument that they could have just used the resources to make a couple more Sonic levels and leave out his butt buddies. But I think people who argue this might not completely understand how many resources go into making a new character and some cutscenes compared to whole stages, especially Sonic stages. Yes, this would have been the best path for them to go down if this was Sonic Adventure with a 3-year development time. But if you don't include the stuff they tried on the Saturn, Sonic Adventure probably only had like 1 to 2 years of development, especially since it was a launch title. So yeah, it sucks, but I wouldn't really blame the developers as much as Sega for being huge cunts and rushing them. But even then, I can't blame them either. They're just trying to get it out for Christmas so they can make a return on investment like any company wants to do. So actually, you should be blaming yourself for being a fucking consumeristic whore. So if I'm gonna play Mr. Pragmatic here, let's break down how little work goes into actually making the other characters for this game, starting with the characters themselves. Because all the logic for Sonic has already been made, they can, for the most part, completely reuse him for all the other characters. You can notice this with the fact that they all have the same structure of their state machines. Also, I've used the word state machine enough that I think I should explain what that is for some people who might not know. To make things simple, a state machine is important in games because they help to conceptualize how to go about making an AI or playable character with any form of depth by having them be a set of states. That may sound a little bit complicated, so let's make an example. Let's build a state machine of a person who can throw a ball. Like, let's really do this. I know this is a review of Sonic, but fuck it, you're gonna learn something cool. Their default state would be normal, just standing around, not holding anything. But from this state, they could pick up a ball and enter a new state. We'll call this state holding. Now, being in this state is special from the default, as we now have two new states that we can enter, called throwing and dropping. After entering either of these states, we won't have a ball in our hands anymore and will return back to our default state. A rule of state machines is that you can't be in two states at the same time. For instance, I can't simultaneously be throwing a ball while in my default state where I don't have one, or dropping the ball while it's still in my hand. Let's look at Sonic's state machines now, which are almost just as simple as the one we just made. He starts at an idle, and from there he can jump, start accelerating, or rev up that spin dash. From his jump, he can do a homing attack or press B to do a light speed dash if he has one charged. Otherwise, he just kind of falls. I'm not even really sure why this is a thing he does. In a spin dash, he can hold it a bit to charge the light speed dash, or let go of the button to get a burst of acceleration. That's basically the crux of it if you don't count things like when Sonic is in the air but not in his jump state, or the state Sonic enters when he's on a ladder. Anyways, getting back to different characters, I promise this ends up being connected. The point is that all of these other characters basically have the exact same state machine. This means less development time, as it's just changing what those states are. Instead of the homing attack, Tails flies, Knuckles glides, Gamma hovers, and Big and Amy don't even have anything for this state. Instead of spin dashing, Tails spins, Knuckles punches, Amy hits with her hammer, Big casts his line, and Gamma aims. But that's it in terms of changes. Other than that, they're all still Sonic, except they have different constants for acceleration and top speed. There's only two characters that have any unique states in their own, and that's Knuckles with his wall climbing, and Amy, who enters a different running state when at top speed, which also opens up a high jump state she can enter from it. It makes her a cool character. So the characters can be made fairly quickly. But what about the story though? Well, a lot of the cutscenes are shared from Sonic's story, but with different dialogue and writing. Now that takes a bit of extra time from the people writing the scripts, but actually recording probably isn't that bad. What is that, an extra couple of days? These few extra things are a small trade-off for a fuck ton of things they didn't need to make more of, mainly the stage assets and designs. Tails stages are just shorter versions of Sonic's with some shortcuts to take advantage of his ability to fly, for instance. That's not to say that there's no new content, it's just that instead of gulping down content, you're just kind of sipping on it. Tails has a unique final boss, Knuckles has some unique places he can get to in his stages, Amy is actually really unique, and I'll talk more about her later. Big has his own version of Emerald Coast with original music, Gamma has original bosses, but altogether the work needed to do all of this is probably not much more than maybe 3 new levels for Sonic Edgewager. And that's 3 stages that could possibly be beat in a total of 10 minutes, compared to 3 or 4 hours of game that the other characters collectively give, which adds up to like 8 or so hours of gameplay. And for Sega, that must have sounded pretty fucking good. Now, I'm not saying that this was all cynically done just to make development time shorter and to milk more content. There's enough effort into these other stories to make them fun to play still. And the story is obviously meant to have this whole thing going on from different perspectives, but it sure doesn't hurt, that's for sure. Now, I'm not going into every character as deep as I did Sonic because I actually respect the finite amount of time you have to live in this world, and I don't want to be repetitive. But we'll go through how the other characters play, work in their levels, and the things unique to them. We'll start off with the guy you get right after Sonic. Shit! Okay, let's go with Knuckles. Jesus Christ, before I start, you ever notice how fucking bad Sonic Team is at making character names? Like, oh, we have a fox with 2 tails. Okay, let's call him Tails. And then there's another character with protruding knuckles. So let's call him Knuckles. And then there's this character we made. It's a big cat character. Oh, we'll call him Big. Like, I must have taken all of their mental energy not to name Sonic Legs. Especially now where he looks like he should be in the NBA playoffs. Like, Sonic is so tall in 06, I'm surprised they didn't bring Jaleel White back to voice him. Knuckles is my fucking guy. He has 5 stages to explore in the game, and I do mean explore. This is one of the coolest things derived from Sonic 3. Knuckles was all about exploration in that game. So Sonic Team took this to its logical conclusion and had you running around an open area trying to find 3 pieces of his Master Emerald, which got broken by chaos. These stages are done isn't pretty quick, but it's enjoyable following the radar and using Knuckles' speed to try and find these pieces as fast as possible. I want to bring up again that I do think playing as different characters was a decision made fairly early on in development, or at least the concept. Sonic's whole story is full of holes that playing as these other characters fill, but also the stages are even structured at times to fit different characters' playstyles. Knuckles' first stage is a great example of this. It's just the end of Speed Highway from Sonic, which felt kinda odd compared to the rest of the stage when playing as him, but now feels appropriate with Knuckles' gameplay. The point is that unlike the Mario 64 example I used earlier, where these things feel more natural and work really well, Sonic Adventure's multiple characters end up working their way into the stages in such an awkward way at times that it feels like a hack instead of an actual solution, which is why in the sequel every character had their own specialized stages instead of playing through the same ones. I think Casinopolis is one of Knuckles' better stages though, or at the very least is more memorable, mainly because of how detailed this higher portion is that only Knuckles can access. The pirate ship is especially fun to mess around in. Along Knuckles' trip to getting his emerald shards back, he sees Robotnik slow walking into an elevator with a microscopic emerald. We get two new things here. First off is this room with completely original assets, and Knuckles gets to fight a version of Chaos that no one else in the game even gets to see. Things like this really help in making these characters not so tedious to play as.
It's about Sonic.
What? What about Sonic?
He's after the pieces of the Master Emerald too.
What do you mean?
You're not the only one on a wild goose chase, idiot. Why should I ruin your surprise?
Now some people might think Knuckles is a bit retarded, because he falls for the same trick Knuckles played on him in 3 and Knuckles, saying Sonic wants to get the Master Emerald when he's really just trying to get the Chaos Emeralds. But think about it for a second. Knuckles spends a lot of time by himself, hanging out on his island. Because of this, he's probably a little socially inept.
Hey, Knuckles! Whoa! What do you think you're doing?
So it makes sense that he'd be a little more gullible and all that. One thing I think is interesting is that Sonic doesn't say, "Wow, I can't believe you fell for this, stupid." He says, "I can't believe you fell for this shit again."
Knuckles, did you let him trick you again?
Which implies that the Genesis games in this game exist in the same canon, which is just strange. If this is the same canon, then why are they even in this area of the world at all? Why aren't they still on Angel Island? Are they still on Angel Island? I mean, Knuckles knows when it's fallen, but maybe he just knows what's up with it because he has that connection to the island. I can't imagine it's the same because there weren't any people mucking around on Angel Island in Sonic 3, just animals. So did they all decide to move together? Like to the same place? What the fuck happened that made them move? Maybe the taxes just got too high. The only really forgettable stage Knuckles plays through is Lost World. This is because this stage is literally the exact same as Sonic's. Hell, Sonic could even go up the walls in this stage, so Knuckles really has nothing going on that's original here. An issue is also that this stage is fairly small. Before this, you got to play Red Mountain, which is just huge, and it's a nice mix of vertical and horizontal stage design, which Lost World doesn't really have. It's just a big thing you have to climb up. But what the fuck? This music is grooving so fucking hard. Listen to this shit. That 3/4 time signature is killing me, it's so good. This is definitely my favorite track in the game. It'd almost be out of place if it wasn't so good. We're in some old South American temple. You'd think there'd be a little bit more ambiance, but instead you get hit with this awesome groove and this E-piano doing some great improv. And I'm about to blow a fucking load over this bass. This kicks the hell out of Sonic's music for this stage. I don't know, it's a bit too spooky for me. Makes me feel like I'm in Jurassic Park. I've been talking a little bit about the music throughout the review, but it really is great. Nakamura wasn't working for Sega at this point, and Michael Jackson couldn't work on it since he was too busy with kids. So they got a couple people actually, mainly Jun Yu, who has a lot of energy to his tracks and worked on basically any track that has a guitar in it. I also have to give a shout out to Fumi Kumatami though, since she not only did this song for Knuckles that I love so much, but she also did Gamma and Beta's themes, which are just fucking, they're too good. And she also did the music for the Chao stuff and some other tracks that are scattered throughout. Having a couple different people do the music led to a pretty diverse soundtrack. Kumatani's stuff is very jazz and house inspired, Jun Yu has a big rock influence, and Kenichi Tokoi, who also did a decent number of tracks for the game, is all over the place in terms of genre. The music is consistently good too, and I love listening to the tracks from it in the background occasionally. I know they made a vinyl for the soundtrack too, and Jesus Christ, I have to get my hands on that. To wrap things up on Knuckles, he has some pretty fun gameplay. In Adventure 2, these stages would start to become really long and a bit boring, mainly since they nerfed the radar. But here they're pretty quick, and the novelty doesn't overstay its welcome. One thing that's disappointing about Knuckles is that he's the only character that doesn't get a unique final boss. Well, the only real character anyways. It's just Chaos 6 again. They try to mix it up and make it more difficult by having this part of the stage that you can't touch without getting hurt, but it's a bit trivial since I end up gliding everywhere with Knuckles anyways. I guess it can be slightly forgiven since he did have his own unique boss during the midpoint. It just feels a little anticlimactic. Also, before I move on to other characters, what is Knuckles supposed to be? And I don't mean animal-wise. I'm asking if he's a black guy. This shit became more confusing in Sonic Adventure. In Sonic 3, characters didn't talk, but Knuckles did have shoes that were based on the Jamaican flag, and he also had dreads. So Knuckles was supposed to be Jamaican, which I can totally buy because I've played Sonic at the Olympic Games, and Knuckles is remarkable at bobsledding. But now things are just complicated. Now he's descendant of some weird Mayan, Aztec, Incan civilization. I mean, I'm not saying there's no black people in Latin America, that'd be ridiculous. But they weren't really hanging out there until the Western slave trade started. But it's even more weird because now rap music plays wherever he goes, which, I mean, you know, happens with every black person. His theme is great too, at least until Bruno Mars shows up.
Streaking lights, loud sounds, and instincts are the elements that keep...
Fuck Hawaii. But Jamaicans don't listen to rap music. I mean, at least it's not like, doesn't seem like a big part of their culture. Same thing with Peruvians, or Mexicans, or any South Americans for that instance. So is Knuckles like an American black guy? He never steals anything. Actually, fuck.
Give me the emeralds you have, right now!
Okay, but look, I'm not being racist, alright? I know that previously, I've said some rude things about people of the African-American variety.
Like chilling at the beach, or calling the police on some minorities.
Very harmful things about the people in these communities.
He even has enough money to buy a slave. They also tried going after the black demographic by making the console cheaper.
But I need to let you guys know that I'm turning over a new leaf here. You see, I was walking down the street yesterday, and while walking, I saw this black guy in a blue shirt. So, you know, of course, it's like, you know, uh-oh, and I did that thing where you start walking on the edges of the sidewalk, you know, so you don't make any contact with him. But as he got closer, I realized this guy actually had a Sonic shirt on. And I realized I was wrong. And I really shouldn't have had that prejudice for this guy. If he had chosen to wear a different shirt, I would have just kept assuming that I shouldn't talk to him since we're from different upbringings. And how can I do that? How can I make such a vast judgment on a guy over variables in his life that he doesn't even control? If he wore a normal blue shirt, instead of assuming he was in a gang, I should have maybe thought, hey, maybe blue is just his favorite color. Because you can't just be looking at somebody as a series of collectives, but as an individual with hopes and dreams and people that he loves, just like me. So I went up to the guy and I said, hey man, did you like Sonic Mania? He took my wallet. Amy's story is actually really cool since it's full of original content. Her first stage is Twinkle Park, but you spend most of the time in a mirror room that Sonic doesn't go into. It's a playful area too. It'll mess with the controls sometimes and you'll need to control the reflections instead of the normal character models. It also has original music, which gives the whole place an uneasy atmosphere. And her second level is the Hot Shelter, which Sonic doesn't fuck with at all. It's a great refresh after playing through Tails and Knuckles' shit, which while they both offer some new things, Amy is the first character to really offer an almost completely different experience. Her whole thing is more about platforming and puzzle solving than speed, but implements a need to rush a bit by placing this little monkey fella in the stage who will show up throughout the level to chase you around. He's also invincible, meaning that while you can't stun him, the viable strategy is to try and run as fast as possible to the next part of the stage. Now you can't have something like this in a Sonic game, you know, something that chases you and is supposed to be threatening, without making them as fast as Sonic, which at that point would just make the whole thing this weird mix of comical and terrifying. So to compensate, Amy has a really slow acceleration to top speed, which does give a good sense of anxiety with this big fucker chasing you everywhere, but makes the overworld just a bitch to use. One point is especially bad where you finish Amy's last stage and you have to go through the entire jungle, and to make things worse you have to climb this long ass ladder, and goddamn her climbing speed is abysmal. It takes her like 20 seconds to climb it, which is enough time to listen to about a ninth of the Snake Eater theme. It even takes place in a jungle, look at that. Not much else to say about her though. Her gameplay is definitely interesting, and it's impressive that they were able to change the way the game feels just by messing around with some values and adding in the stalker robot. Most of the characters in Sonic Adventure were designed as a way to show off the Dreamcast a bit. The most obvious of which being Knuckles and Tails, who show off the scale and draw distance of the game, and Gamma demonstrates all the crap they could shove on the screen without the frame rate dying. Lots of enemy hitboxes and explosions everywhere. But Big might be the most shameless, as he's just kind of a commercial. You know, I don't really get what's so bad about Big. Like, what is it about this guy that gets everyone so angry all the time? That guy just wants to fucking fish. His story takes around 30 minutes to complete, even with the unescapable cutscenes, which I understand is just basically saying the game only sucks dick for like a little bit, but it's not that. His gameplay is so different from the others that it feels more like a minigame, and because of that, it's got some novelty to it. Not to mention he gets this great music on his version of Emerald Coast. Sonic Team says Big was made because they wanted a character that wasn't always in a rush, but I know the real reason. They wanted to create more intrigue for the player, like a lure in the water, if you will, to try and bring people over to the world of fishing games on the Dreamcast, and that they might take a bite out of the lure and pay some money for a full-price game all about fishing. And you might think those games are pretty dumb sports games, but fuck you if you think that shit. These games are fucking fire, and if you got one of those fishing controllers, these games become so comfy it's unreal. But Big never really hooks you like that. Like, it's a fun distraction, but it's nowhere near as deep as games dedicated to these mechanics. And I just remember being confused as to what I needed to do. Like, I knew I had to throw my lure in the water, like I'm not a complete tard, but I never knew what to do when the little frog bit it. It wasn't until later that I learned I had to press up a lot on the stick to start reeling him in. Because of not knowing this, I was never able to beat these stages as a kid, which was very frustrating. I think that's why Big is so hated, actually. Because his story is pretty inoffensive in terms of length and content. But when you don't know what to do and you need to beat his stages, or you don't get to experience the ending of the game because of this stupid idiot that's like, Froggy, you just fucking hate him. So it seems like SA1 is a game that starts out high and just gets a bit lower in quality as it goes on. Sonic is fantastic. Knuckles' gameplay is fun enough, and they kept this whole shtick from Sonic 3 where he can go places Sonic can't due to his ability to climb walls. Amy is alright and breaks things up, but overall isn't really as fun to play as with her slow speed, which brings her down even though she has the advantage of having very different stages from the rest of the cast, along with some interesting platforming gameplay. And Big is fine. It's almost a linear decline, story by story. So you assume the last story is just going to be mediocre, but that's where you're wrong. E102 Gamma might just be the best part of Sonic Adventure in terms of story. You'd think Sonic's would be the most polished in the game, but no, it's the robot. For some reason, Sonic Team just decided to make this random-ass character that never existed before and make his story a masterpiece, like as a joke or something. The other characters are in the story, but I wouldn't say they're crucial to his plot. So it's good even if you don't know anything about Sonic, which you can't really say for most of these stories. The story opens up with an introduction from your creator, Dr. Robotnik.
You're the second of my E100 model machines!
To make sure you work properly, you play through his testing chamber where you'll shoot dolls of Knuckles, Tails, and Sonic. After testing out the stage, Robotnik decides that only one robot can come on his ship and forces you to fight your brother Beta.
I am pitting the two of you against each other, and the winner serves on my ship.
Right off the bat, this kind of establishes that this doctor is a huge douchehole because he's forcing you to fight your brother just for his own trivial fun and his desire to only have the strongest robots on his ship. Some shit happens involving finding a frog to loosely connect the other stories and gives you an excuse to go through Emerald Emerald Coast. Sorry about that, it's getting a bit late. But the real shit comes after. Gamma is told to head to a room on the ship, but you end up going into this room instead and seeing something insane.
Beta.
This scene is fucking amazing. There's basically no dialogue, just taking in his brother being mutilated and enhanced. The end of the cutscene is just great too.
This is the wrong room.
Not only is this funny in a kind of dark way, but it shows that Gamma, even though he's trying to remain objective, has had something open up in him, making him just a bit skeptical of his creator. It doesn't help that right after this event, he goes to see Amy, where the bird ends up convincing Gamma to free them both by just staring at him for a bit, which makes sense later. Both of these events start to really fuck with Gamma's unconscious, but still not totally, as he does comply with Robotnik in the following scene and attempts to kill Sonic. Amy ends up stopping it by going, we're friends, don't hurt people, and decides that he's done being Robotnik's bitch. He's going to do his own shit. The self-monologue he does while leaving the egg carrier is just great. The screen flashes images of these things that have influenced Gamma to make this decision, getting faster and faster before turning into radio noise. And cuts to Gamma, who says probably the most punk shit I've ever heard in my life.
Dr. Robotnik. Enemy. Master registration deleted.
At this point in the story, it's now completely independent from the rest of these weirdos. There's no Sonic or Amy or even Robotnik. Just Gamma deciding he's going to free all the animals trapped in his robot bros. I haven't talked much about the stages, but man, they're really cool too. I just wish more of them were like Hot Shelter. This stage is fairly lengthy, not to mention challenging. Gamma has a clock that counts down instead of up, and will kill him if it falls to 0. To replenish this time, you can hold the B button to lock onto as many enemies as possible and shoot for high combos. Nowadays, this stage isn't difficult, but it actually used to kill me sometimes as a kid. In the other stages, there's really no risk. You get so much time, and the stages are so short that you probably get past them even without shooting any enemies. It's kind of sad because some tension would make these stages that much more fun and rewarding. But that's not to say it isn't inherently fun shooting huge amounts of enemies though. It's a great way to show off how many objects the Dreamcast can handle. Before moving on, I just want to mention how fun Gamma's states are. At full speed, he'll start rolling on wheels and go, mode change.
Mode change.
And this shit he does when he's on a body of water so he doesn't get wet is so fucking cute. I love this thing they do at the end of levels where Gamma names off the robots he saved and the ones still remaining. It seems pointless at first, but it starts to get really cool once you go back to the sunken egg carrier. And the game plays this great fucking music that doesn't play anywhere else in the game. It's so triumphant and just gets you pumped to finish saving the last 2 robots.
E-Series data. Beginning search. Accessing data. Hot Shelter. E-Series location confirmed. Unlocking Hot Shelter sector now.
This thing leads to what might be one of my favorite payoffs of any game, honestly. It's unreal. After beating all 3 of the other robots, this great fucking cutscene plays.
Gamma. Beta.
Okay, I think I need to explain what I love about this. First of all, I love that it's just silent with the sound effects at first. It makes it more meaningful when Gamma's music starts playing. And then when the new form of Beta comes flying in, ready for the rematch, the music transitions into the theme of Beta, which wouldn't do much for me really, if it wasn't for the fact that Beta's theme is fucking amazing, and also turns the track from this ambient synth into some hype-ass house beat with a sax in it. If there's one thing I do when making this game, it'd be to let the theme for Beta override the normal Overworld music, to keep the energy going. I'd also want to preload Beta into this area, meaning that you can just seamlessly confront this motherfucker with no downtime once I enter that area. Do all this shit where it zooms in on the boss and displays their name, and while that's happening, preload all the invisible walls around the area. This should be pretty bug-free as long as you just walk Beta from exiting the area. Now I understand this couldn't be done because they probably had all these algorithms made in a way that would probably be pretty specialized for the set of things they wanted to do, with not much lenience for changes since they had to get this thing out to the stores in a reasonable time. But if I was in charge of making the game, and I had unlimited time, I would put this in as a specialty thing, like somewhere else in the game, just here, just because I really think it would be that cool. This is because Beta Mark II is a fucking awesome fight. They build him up the whole of Gamma's story and he's a lot of fun. I like that he hits your bullets out of the way. No other bosses in the game really react to you when you try to spam hitboxes at them, except for maybe Chaos 2 as Knuckles. The animations where he teleports away and leaves a trail in his path is fantastic as well. My favorite moment is definitely when the camera shifts to a view of Beta from high up, and you have to control Gamma and avoid attacks from this strange perspective. There's so much unique shit with this boss actually. It makes me wish that they didn't just use Chaos for almost every boss fight, because these more unique ones are my absolute favorite. I do think they could have done something cool at Gamma's countdown though in the fight. It counts down from 3 minutes, but isn't really used for any interesting way that makes the boss more fun, and it was probably arbitrarily chosen as it shouldn't even take you longer than slightly half that to beat Beta. He shoots these small guys out. Maybe you start me off with like 30 seconds and I have to balance whether to be spending my time gaining more time with a combo or to take a risk and go for a hit against Beta. But again, they had no time to make this game. The ending is incredibly tasteful. Again, no dialogue or anything. Gamma accomplishes his mission of saving all his brothers, and in one last action, Beta shoots Gamma, allowing the bird in him to be free as well. Originally, Sega planned on having Gamma shoot himself to free the bird. This is why in the previous cutscene he's looking at his gun while saying his name. Unfortunately, they changed it so that Beta shoots him before dying, which is fine and has a different feeling to it. But I just love the idea of that shit. Sonic's story is a cutscene in a video game, but Gamma's is definitely above that. I wouldn't call it a movie or a film, but I would call it a flick. It's obvious shit, but I also like how Gamma's normally robotic sounding theme is reprised as a natural piano for when he's freed from the robot. Well, you know, as natural sounding as you can get from what sounds like an M1 synth. The fact that shit this good is just shoved into what's essentially a glorified Dreamcast advertisement is borderline offensive. They should have made a spin-off with this kind of shit. Like how that one guy that made the Digimon movie went on to make Summer Wars because he was pissed off that his great fucking idea for a story got wasted on a fucking Digimon OVA. After completing everyone's story in the game, a new one opens up. What's dumb is that it tries to be mysterious by having the model be a question mark, but the name under it literally just says Super Sonic. This story is full of cutscenes, okay, so get ready. It turns out that Chaos wasn't killed on the Ark even though he got beat 3 times, and instead was just mucking about looking for the emeralds again. He ends up taking back the 6 emeralds Knuckles brought with him after his story, and now Sonic needs to rush to the Tornado 2 before Chaos can get the emeralds in there. But first, Tikal needs to show him one of her flashbacks.
Oh, jeez!
We find out that her tribe was trying to use the Chaos Emeralds to win wars against other nations, and it's just impossible to take seriously because everybody just looks like Knuckles. In this, we learn Chaos turned evil because of all this shit, and I'm just thinking, we need to get to the fucking emerald. People are about to die.
Sonic, wake up!
I was on a snooze cruise, I guess.
Good thing you're okay.
I don't think either of you are okay.
Come!
Ew, that's gross as fuck. I'm so happy I didn't play your story. They end up finding the tornado just in time to watch Chaos take it from them, which means one of 2 things. Either Tikal completely fucked over Sonic by making him space out and miss his chance to get the emerald, or Chaos was just being cheeky and already knew the emerald was there and was just waiting for Sonic to show up so he could snipe it from him. Either way, you probably don't mind because you want to see this shit happen, you know? The game has been teasing that he becomes this serpent-looking thing for a while, so it's finally time to see that paid off. And it is with what is still an incredibly well done and beautifully pre-rendered cutscene. Let's give it a watch, because it is still great.
Yo. I'm about to bust this fat ass nut from you motherfuckers. Oh shit, nigga. Oh fuck. Oh shit. Oh.
Yeah!
Oh. Whoa.
In my face!
Motherfucking neck. Shit.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, for fuck's sake, it's like Robotnik's airship again. Jesus, they sure lost a lot by not getting that emerald in time. A bunch of fucking people just died. Like, people were in their cars just driving. People are just walking around. You really fucked up, Sonic. This thing is so tough, even Robotnik's backup egg carrier can't even make a dent. But it's all good, because now that we've seen all the backstory for Tikal, she can actually help us now. Chaos absorbed all the power from the emeralds, and Tikal has decided that he has to go back.
They must be sealed in the Master Emerald now!
How can that help?
It won't change how he feels inside, will it? His heart will still remain in turmoil, and his anger just won't vanish.
So Sonic has another idea. His friends say, "Aw, you know, he absorbed the negative energy."
Chaos only used the negative power of the emeralds.
Which, how the fuck do you know that, Tails? But because Sonic is all about that positive energy, he can use them. Oh shit, I skipped some games, so you might be confused right now. Okay, so Sonic can transform into a Super Saiyan now when he gets all the Chaos Emeralds. This is brought over from Sonic 2 and 3, where if you get all the Chaos Emeralds in some minigames, Sonic can turn into this invincible guy who can plow into enemies like it's no problem. I don't even know what happens if you get all the emeralds in Sonic 1. I think you get like some shit in the mail, and you get to meet Yuji Naka, and he gives you a coupon for a free Happy Meal. The hype behind this shit is real though when you're an 8-year-old. Kids who wore shirts with flames on them would definitely flex at recess about getting all the super emeralds and shit. But really in these games it's kind of a pain in the ass, especially in Sonic 3. When you're trying to enjoy the really great music composed by Michael Jackson, and because you pressed A while in the air, it's like, oh fuck, I didn't know I had 50 rings. You know what? Fuck Super Sonic. I don't care. He's just yellow and annoying. In this game, having it be a predefined thing that just happens at the end point isn't so bad. Sonic is already so fast, he becomes hard to control at times, and I can't imagine adding more speed would do anything but be a hindrance. And invincibility isn't hot shit anymore either like it was in the 2D games, because enemies aren't really that big of a threat to Sonic anymore since you can see them from a mile away now. It helps that the actual fight is pretty fun too. It's an enjoyable balancing game of trying to avoid Chaos's attacks while also trying to collect rings and keep from dying, and keeping your speed high enough so that you can inflict damage. It's also very fun to skate around on the water, I think mainly due to this little texture. Playing the opening theme during this section is great also. It's pretty fucking shonen anime, I like it. But after beating him, he goes in a round 2, which has some more complex geometry to maneuver around, as well as Chaos's AI throwing out a lot more shit at you. It's a genuine challenge, but for some reason the music is replaced with this tense orchestral track. It fits the boss, but I just wish they put it at the beginning of the fight and had round 2 play the opening instead. I think it would have brought a lot more hype, but I also get that they want to carry over the energy from the cutscene before the boss, so maybe just have both of them play the theme and use this track for another boss? I don't know, it's a great boss regardless. I guess hitting Chaos a bit was all it took to make him chill out. Anyways, after this, wait a second, there is nothing after this. I'm done. Jesus fucking Christ. So let's finish this up. My thoughts on this game have been a bit scattered, but it's a scattered game. This medium is a marriage between engineering and art.
Especially a character like this, which is fairly complex.
Sonic Adventure doesn't have the best engineering or the best art even, but it does do things right where it matters. Sonic is fun to play as. The art direction on stages in the overworld are great, even if the models don't show the best examples of what the Dreamcast can do. Would it be better if it had better art, the camera worked better, and you couldn't clip out of the levels? Of course. But would it really make it that much better? And that's why I didn't complain about them. My issues come from the repetitiveness of playing through the other characters, and the fact that some of these characters just aren't really fun to play as for more than a little bit. There's also the issue of how boring it is to play Sky Chase a total of 4 times. These are what keeps Sonic Adventure from being a great game, not the things that nowadays would just get fixed with patches. I really do think Sonic Team cared about this game, even if they fucked up a lot. There's a lot of care put into things, especially aesthetically. To get an idea of how the Mystic Ruins would be, like in terms of looks and the music and all that, the developers actually took a full tour for research, from southern Mexico to Central America and then South America. And it's really a miracle, you know, because they survived. It's why Tails has this little mini game where he rides down the desert. It comes from hanging out in Peru and seeing that shit, so of course they put it in. It's fucking riding down the desert on a snowboard. But a studio wouldn't do this if they were cynically just doing their job to make money for their bosses. You do this because you give a shit, and you want to make something cool. And I think I respect that passion in a game more than just technically solid and smooth experiences. There's no such thing as a perfectly programmed game or a perfectly planned game, because these things are made by people at the end of the game. One of my favorite games is Earthbound for the Super Nintendo. In fact, it might even be my favorite, and it has tons of problems. The difficulty is terribly balanced, the sprites aren't the best for its time, menu navigation is incredibly janky and frustrating, and it has a whole dungeon dedicated to managing the shit inventory. Things like this make Earthbound a game that's not so smooth to play a decent amount of the time. But I'm not looking for a perfectly smooth experience in a video game. It's a great thing to have, it shows polish on the design and engineering side of things, but what I'm looking for is fun and playfulness from the developer. When those things are in the game, it shows. There's more experimentation. It's really hard for me to articulate. In Earthbound, it's the great writing and the overwhelmingly optimistic story, the experimental and darker moments like Moonside and Magican, and the fact that the game is at almost all times throwing new content at you to try and get you to have an emotional reaction to some sprites on the screen. Now, is Sonic Adventure a great game like Earthbound? No, of course not. You can't even compare them. But it is a good game. Just looking at Sonic's story, it has incredibly diverse stage design. The story is cheesy, but it's a little fun addition. Sonic is incredibly fun to control, especially in the overworld where you have a bunch of space you can just play around and fuck with things. This doesn't mean you can just forget about the technical things. If you don't have that, you're fucked. But I feel like people sometimes think that that's all that's important in games. Like most GameSpot reviews might as well just be the game boots without crash, 8 out of 10.